Walk to feel alive. Rediscover happiness in the simple things. Smile. Make yourself at home. Discover the joy of the cold and of vertigo. Listen to the silence. Decipher the language of animals. Walk amidst thousand-year-old forests and the countless forms of life that live there. Travel through the city's underground. Appreciate the view from up high. Then enjoy its unique sights. Look at the horizon and wonder if there is more than meets the eye. Lose yourself in funiculars and labyrinth. Find yourself on a mysterious island. Be amazed by a different culture. Learn about ancient beliefs and traditions. Marvel in their colors and shapes. Wait for the calm of night. And yet, feel that you are never quite alone. Understand that home is wherever we want it to be.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Marco Navarro. I'm the Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of Chile in the Philippines, and I will be the moderator for this event. Today's webinar is titled Public Policies and Inequalities, Experiences, Learnings, and Challenges for Chile and the Philippines. This activity is part of the Chile ASEAN cycle of dialogues hosted by Chilean embassies in Southeast Asia. We would like to thank all of our embassies across the region who made this event possible. Chile and ASEAN has a long-lasting relationship built on more than 30 years of cooperation, mutual understanding, and trust. Our country not only has diplomatic relations with all of its members, but also economic growing relations with each of them. In the case of the Philippines, 2021 marks a special year for us. First, it marks the 75 years diplomatic relations between our two countries. It was in 1967 when Chile opened its first diplomatic mission in Manila, the first embassy of our country in the Southeast Asia region. 2021 also marks an historical significance for Chile and the Philippines too, because it marks the 500 years anniversary of the Magallanes circumnavigation of the globe, and for the Philippines, the 500 years since the victory of Mactan and the birth of one of its greatest heroes, Lapu-Lapu. Both countries share common cultural heritage, and we hope that with this commemoration, we will make a bridge of understanding and mutual trust. First, I would like to introduce the first opening remarks for Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs of Chile, Carolina Valdivia.
Excellency Satvinder Singh, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for the Economic Community, distinguished ambassadors, academia, lecturers, dear friends. I am delighted to deliver some remarks in the inauguration of the cycle of dialogues organized by the Chilean embassies to the ASEAN countries in collaboration with the Center for International Studies of the Catholic University of Chile. This activity is a space that aims to open conversations between relevant actors in different areas of both regions to discuss new ways to enhancing Chilean policy towards the Southeast Asia region. For this purpose, the embassies of Chile to Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand will organize webinars on a wide range of topics such as community building, public policies, cooperation, history, regional situations, among others. Chile's relations with the ASEAN countries have increased in recent years. Historically, trade has been the prevailing link. Nevertheless, we seek to explore new spaces to share experiences and establish new networks to enrich this friendship. Considering the historical ties and friendship between our countries, Chile has a special commitment towards ASEAN and aims to foster greater integration. Chile has diplomatic relations with all ASEAN members and 6 resident missions, all with clear and ambitious bilateral agendas. Chile was the first Latin American country to become a formal development partner of ASEAN. This status represents a milestone in Chile's foreign policy towards this region, but also a challenge that invites us to reflect on new perspectives of engagement that open up areas of agenda-setting issues. As you know, ASEAN has 3 pillars: the political security community, the socio-cultural community, and the economic community. And Chile is aware that a comprehensive relationship must address each of these axes. On good governance, we have invited ASEAN member states and the General Secretariat to participate in a course that will address this topic in October this year to share the experience we have gained in this area. In addition, we expect to present in the coming weeks our cooperation project on financial intelligence analysis, which will allow us to generate further strategic exchange in this area. Given the similar development experiences of Chile and the ASEAN countries, it is possible to develop spaces for cooperation to overcome common problems. For example, with Indonesia, we are working closely on ocean protections and sustainable fisheries. With Malaysia, we are exploring cooperation in areas of innovation. And with the Philippines, we could work on public policy and addressing inequality. Likewise, with Singapore, we are working in green hydrogen and digital economies. With Thailand, we have a capacity-building cooperation program for all ASEAN members. And with Vietnam, we have shared our expertise in superfood cultivation. Of course, there are new challenges that we should face together, such as climate change, a global priority that requires urgent and common action. On this issue, Chile has designed an ambitious agenda to transform its energy matrix, starting with solar energy and hydrogen fuel generation. For this project, we have campaigned with the ASEAN countries for a partnership in this endeavor. I would like to conclude highlighting that this series of online dialogues is the first step of its kind. We hope that the results of these conversations will lead to fruitful ideas for our foreign policy and a better mutual understanding. Thank you all.
We thank the Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs of Chile for its kind words. And now I would like to give the floor to the Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN, Mr. Satvinder Singh, for his opening remarks.
Your Excellency, Ms. Valdivia, the Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Chile, distinguished Chilean ambassadors to the ASEAN countries, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly grateful to be given this opportunity to join all of you today for the dialogue series on the relationship between Chile and ASEAN. Regrettably, we are not able to meet face-to-face this time, but I trust that this virtual environment, it's a second best, and it's also a sort of a conducive way for us to at least begin and continue our productive dialogue. It's indeed a privilege for me to use this occasion, and I intend to use it today to reflect a little on our economic relationship between ASEAN and Chile, but more importantly on the cooperation commitments that exist on the two sides. And I also like to touch a little bit on possible ways that we could both consider in order to enhance and strengthen our partnerships. ASEAN, as you know, considers Chile as one of Latin America's fastest growing economies and also one of the most attractive investment destinations. However, due to the global economic downturn caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, both the trade and investment flows between the two regions have decreased in 2020. ASEAN and Chile, we registered a trade amounting to about US $2.9 billion in 2020. This number is a stark decrease from the total trade the year before in 2019, which stood at US $3.2 billion. The same time in 2020, FDI also suffered as the inflow to the ASEAN from Chile recorded only about $200 million US dollars. And again, this is a stark 60% decrease from the year before in 2019. We are all aware that COVID-19 pandemic definitely has disrupted global supply chains and have really caused unprecedented health crisis and also adversely impacted the lives and the livelihood of the people around the world. And in this context, I must say that COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the ASEAN region's growth and momentarily for this 1 year. In fact, in 2020, the region as a whole actually has contracted by an estimate of 3.3%. But I also say that this is a momentarily contraction because according to the Asian Development Bank, the region is also destined to collectively come through this year in 2021 with a positive growth of 4%. Now, this estimation takes into account the stricter lockdowns that have taken place in the ASEAN capitals, especially in the second and third quarters of this year due to the Delta COVID pandemic affecting our economies. But by 2022, Asian Development Bank have shared that we are expecting the region to recover even better and having a potential growth of 5.2%. Likewise, our total trade has also seen a decline in value in 2020, where trade has fallen 5.5% to a collective of US 2.7 trillion for the whole region. And uncertainties also have dampened investor sentiments as reflected by a fall in FDI inflows into the ASEAN by almost 25%. FDI in last year stood at US 137.3 billion. And still, even though the amount is not as large as what it was in 2019, the region actually still continues to make ASEAN one of the largest recipients of FDI in the world. Recovery, as we all know, is not encompassing and is not as steady as we want it to be. And again, not all sectors in the ASEAN have recovered. In fact, several key sectors that are major contributors to our GDP, who are also major contributors of jobs, especially in the informal and services sectors, those are probably linked to travel, tourism, and other contact-intensive sectors. These are the sectors that has been most impacted by COVID. And in fact, I would dare to say that I think this is where we are also, all governments are working very hard to ensure that care is taken in order not to be able to meet some of the requirements of some of these affected informal sectors, the low-income groups that have been deeply impacted by COVID. As we are speaking right now, is somewhere around in August now, almost 8 million cases of COVID-19 has been detected in our region, and there's a fatality rate of about 2.1%. What I can assure you with confidence is that there's been an active rollout of vaccination programs in every of the ASEAN member states, and it has gained momentum, especially in the last 1 to 2 months. As we speak now, about 17.6% of the ASEAN population have been inoculated by at least one dose of vaccine, and I think this number is rapidly rising. What I can see is that sometimes vaccination has been hindered by inconsistent supply of vaccines, logistical issues, even hesitancy amongst population in some of the ASEAN member states. And of course, in some instances, just the sheer size of the population makes it challenging. I think in this direction, it is important that ASEAN and Chile cooperation includes the sharing of good experiences, the best practices on distribution of vaccines, as well as the transfer of knowledge in supporting good health, mobility, social and economic recovery. ASEAN and Chile relationship has also been progressing well and growing stronger across various areas. Chile is a development partner to the ASEAN, and earlier this year both sides have reaffirmed our relationship by adopting the practical cooperation areas, we call it PCA, for the ASEAN-Chile Development Partnership 2025. This practical cooperation area reflects our commitment in key priority areas of cooperation that are important for ASEAN, especially important for us amidst all the important issues that are emerging globally. These areas includes digital economy, cybersecurity, technical and vocational education and training, public health, as we just spoke, climate change and sustainable development, which is so critical today, tourism, fisheries, biodiversity, and smart cities. We are pleased to note that the practical cooperation areas will not only strengthen the relationship between ASEAN and Chile, but will also help to contribute to the realization to the ASEAN Community Vision of 2025 goals, such as narrowing the development gap of the entire region. We are highly thankful and we truly value Chile's commitment to support the implementation of the existing cooperation activities with ASEAN through the ASEAN Pacific Alliance Framework for Cooperation. This partnership definitely has brought benefits that will improve the economic and trade ties between the two blocs. And in this regard, we should also anticipate closer engagement through the development and implementation of a new ASEAN and Pacific Alliance work plan, which will stretch from now to 2023. We look forward to that. Finally, I would also like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation for Chile's interest in joining the ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Area Agreement. This agreement is considered a high-standard, modern, ambitious agreement amongst all of the ASEAN agreements, and ASEAN definitely could become an attractive destination for Chilean investment and further enhancement of global supply chains between your region and the ASEAN region, as well as I do believe that through this new agreement, Chile could also strengthen and serve as a stronger gateway for the ASEAN region to access Latin American markets and opportunities. We hope that we could enhance the economic linkages between the ASEAN and Chile. We hope that we can increase our trade and investment, broaden the market opportunities, people-to-people connectivity, and create a much larger economy of scale for businesses in our respective markets. On the whole, I do believe that we have made significant progress deepening our ASEAN-Chilean relations. However, there still may be opportunities for further enhancements to unblock the potential of the both markets. Now, this maybe could be in the areas of fresh investments that are mutually beneficial, and I see the areas of sustainable mining initiatives or sustainable renewable energy initiatives as tremendous areas where there could be opportunities for both sides to harness. In closing, I would like to take this opportunity to once again thank the government of Chile for convening this event. I do believe that through such exchange of dialogue, of ideas, of commitment on both sides in wanting to strengthen our partnerships, one thing will only happen, which is our relationship will get stronger, will get more real, and the benefits of our closeness will be felt by our businesses and the betterment of our people. Thank you very much.
We thank Mr. Ting for his kind words and opening remarks. And now, the Ambassador of Chile to the Philippines, His Excellency Claudio Rojas Fachel, will deliver his opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Good morning to our panelists, and good night to those that are in Chile right now in real time. And first of all, I would like to thank you for being with us this morning and to working on a very substantive subject in the context of what we realize is a special effort for Chile to promote our bilateral relationship with any and specific countries of the ASEAN community, and in particular with the Philippines in the context what is Philippines to the ASEAN. Philippines is a founding father of the ASEAN community, and in that context is a major key player for our work in the region. Also, we have had a very substantive work through the years with the Philippines and with other partners in the region, and in particular in the EPEC fora that has been very innovative and has robust results. But the idea of today and how we lay out this seminar is to reflect upon what is the reality of the SDGs and how SDGs, the Agenda for Development 2030 of the United Nations, could invite countries to facilitate an enlarged process of working together. And the reality in this process is very systemic in the sense that there is a responsibility at the international level, but also there is the size of the implementations and the challenge faced by each country related with the means of implementations, and in that context, the responsibility that all the key players and stockholders play in this process, and that's it goes without say, related with the social society, the civil social society and the NGOs community and academia. Therefore, when we propose this webinar, we want to see like an experience sharings, but in the sense that also open the possibility for Chile on sharing particularly a very innovative mechanism for development, the possibility that we could promote best practices and lessons learned. We do have a framework for our work, and that is our quality and unique quality that we are social development partners of ASEAN. And in that context, the aim of the seminar is to promote a new way of discussing issues that are of interest to both to different countries in the region, but to the both regions. As it was made reference to, for instance, to the Pacific Alliance, also is a sub-regional entity that could also work together with ASEAN and will promote what is our aim. Our aim is to try to be in a position that we could provide food for thoughts and move ahead our agenda in terms of achieving the SDGs. I want to make reference to my colleague and friend here in Manila, who is the UN coordinator, Gustavo Gonzalez, who was due to participate in this seminar, but he has sent me a message one day ago saying that unfortunately he was not going to be able, but instead of him, he will take part in this seminar. He's a senior economist of the UN office here in Manila. But I want to share the message that Gustavo sent me in terms of the challenge that we are confronted with due to the pandemic. At this present moment, back to this seminar is taking place another seminar, another substantive meeting where Gustavo Gonzalez, the UN in Manila, is engaging with Philippine agency and government entities to deal with one of the major challenges that we have been posed with, that is related with schooling and the closing of the schools and the reality that confront a major setback for children and youth, having the fact that it's almost more than a year now that the school has been closed due to the pandemic. So actually that reflects the sort of challenge, and also is an example how was identified the setback and the negative impact of the economic development that pandemic has had in the ASEAN region in terms of the target of the SDG also. And that poses a major challenge for the international community as a whole to work together in order to reinforce our efforts and to move forward in try to achieve these goals. With further ado, I'm looking very much forward for the discussion and the debate, the Q&A, and again, I want to overemphasize the fact that we have engaged the international community with the UN, the perception of government entities with Ambassador Galvez, who has been closely related with financing for development in the UN system, and with Mary Joy from CARE in the context of civil society. These three pillars is the one that really moved the agenda forward, and in the sense it reflects the new approach that we confront the international community, and in the SDG context discussion is that we want to try to move from our silo approach and try to do a sort of a cross-cutting approach in what is the work of all stakeholders to move forward our agenda and to try to find the well-being of our people. Whatever we do is comprised for the fact that we would like to promote economic development and social well-being for our people. So thank you so much for being with us and looking forward for the discussion. Thank you.
We thank the Ambassador Rojas for its opening remarks. And now we will move to the presentations of the webinar. When we were discussing how to do this webinar, one of the main ideas that the ambassador highlights was to gather different points of view when we approach to public policies and inequities. In that sense, we know that currently in our society, inequality affects us from different points of view. We have income inequality, educational one, gender, but also environmental rights in the last generation of inequalities detected in our societies. There's a global consensus that right now inequality is affecting the way that we enjoy the human rights too. And this is a challenge not only for the Philippines, but also for Chile. So we hope that these presentations will reflect different points of view in a way to approach to the inequality and ways to tackle it and reduce it. Let me introduce our speakers for today. So our first speaker will be Ambassador Eduardo Galvez, who is a former ambassador of Chile to the World Trade Organization. With more than 30 years of diplomatic experience, Ambassador Galvez has been present in several multilateral negotiations, specifically for funding for development. He will be sharing the Chilean experience in these kind of topics. Then we will move to the last minute change, because we will be with Mr. John Alikpala, who is the senior economist for the UN Coordinator Residence Office here in the Philippines. He will be exposing regarding the relation between the UN and the local government in a way to approach to the relation with the Philippines, but also with other ASEAN countries. He has more than almost 30 years of experience in these kind of topics related also with cooperation and development. Finally, we will have the presentation of Mrs. Mary Joy Gonzalez. He is in charge of the Move Up program for CARE Philippines, one of the main NGO organizations here present in the Philippines, but also present in several continents. Let me introduce first then the presentation of Ambassador Eduardo Galvez. Ambassador, now you have the floor, please.
Thank you for the invitation to be part of this seminar, and this panel really. And I thank in particular my friend Claudio Rojas, and I'm very happy to be with him and other friends and other Chilean embassies in ASEAN countries. My subject today is the presentation is going to be Innovative Financing for Development and South-South Cooperation, the Chilean Experience. And let me tell you why I choose this subject. First, because it is related to the International Conference on Financing for Development that was organized in Monterrey, Mexico in 2002, because there the idea of innovative financing was in one of the paragraphs we negotiated. And let me say that this conference has a long period of discussion. We started negotiating in 1997 at the end of that month for 4 years. It took 5 years to get to the conference. And as you are in Southeast Asia, you know that in 1997 was the financial crisis. And because we have that financial crisis, the first major crisis of the globalization, the countries of the Southeast Asia and the countries of Latin America were the ones who were pushing for this conference. So we were very much real friends and together with the 77 pushing for the conference. I can remember my colleague from Malaysia, my colleague from Philippines, from Mexico. So we were the one just pushing ahead this conference. That it was in some way, but it's a little bit different of what we have in the 60s with the new international economic order. It was a little bit different because it was not, we have an approach that was more perhaps not so, there was no, they're trying to be contributing and be pragmatic. But anyway, that's one of the reasons, because we were together on that moment. We fight for 5 years. It was very difficult to get to the conference. The developed countries were not happy with that, just because they said that United Nations should not deal with financial or trade issues. And because for that we have the IMF or we have the World Bank. That was their argument. And we say, well, this is it's a different, because this is not going to be a technical approach to financing for development. It will be a political approach. And that meant that we need 5 years to convince them. And at the end of the day, because the crisis and another issues that happened in 2001, we have the conference. The second reason is just because Ambassador Rojas is, I'm sure he knows more than me about this subject. He was working very hard on this with our friend and Chilean economist, Ricardo Davis, who was in charge of these issues as an advisor of President Lagos. So that is the reason why I'm having this subject. As an introduction, I must say that three issues I will discuss with you. First, what is the Monterrey Consensus on financing for development, and how come that one of the paragraphs said, look, countries should work with innovative financing ideas. Second, I will talk, this is in 2002. I will talk something that we created, a partnership among different countries in 2004 that was called a partnership against hunger and poverty. That was a partnership was started at the UN with President Lagos from Chile, President Chirac from France, President Lula from Brazil, and other leaders. There were 4 or 5, I think the UK and Norway. And they launched this great idea of fighting against hunger and poverty. And from then, we will go to what is called a pilot group that will have a technical discussion and will talk about different innovative financing for development that Chile will, I will talk later on, which is the one that we will use, but it's going to be to provide resources for UNITAID. And UNITAID was a fight against 3 major diseases that were predominant in developing countries. And the third issue that I would like to talk to you is about the Chile Fund against hunger and poverty. That is a fund that is being funded, if you want. Resources are coming from the innovative finance. That innovative finance means $2 that each Chilean who flies in an inter to be provided for South-South cooperation. And that is been done together with the UNDP Santiago. So it is related to always to an international UN, some program or organization of the United Nations. That are the 3 main areas that I will be talking about. First, the Conference of International Financing for Development. In 1997, there was a decision on the development agenda to say we should consider the idea of having an international event on financing for development. Or in December, a working group was created, and this working group was working for 2 years in order to decide if it's going to be a conference, a seminar, or what type of event, and what are going to be the subjects that are going to be discussed at the UN. The first thing that we decided was that it's not going to be a UN conference. It's going to be an international conference because the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank will be invited to be part of the organizer of in the Secretariat, and also the World Trade Organization and UNCTAD. Why we did that? Because we want them to be, whatever decision we're going to take will be also mandatory for them. And that was important, because if we are talking about finance or trade, you cannot do it alone with the General Assembly of the United Nations. And this discussion decided at the end that the subject of this conference will be first the national, the international, and the systemic issues related to financial for development. The national is very clear to understand, meaning every country needs to manage their economy in a reasonable way. They need to have saving, need to have investment, to avoid corruption, etc. So that was one part of the conference, and one part of the result. It is very clear. The second one was what is going to have in the document that is called the Monterrey Consensus, are international initiatives that are relevant for financing your development. And there you have different sort of elements. And one of those was, of course, trade as an engine for growth. Another one was the idea of having technical cooperation and ODA increases. A third area of paragraph was related to mobilizing international resources for development, and including foreign direct investment. And in this context of these leading actions, you will have the promotion of innovative finance. And finally, we will discuss also the issues of external debt, how we can deal with that in the different institutions, and how we're going to work with this problem that was at that moment very key one for those countries in Southeast Asia and Latin America. And the last issue was what we call systemic issues, and that was about how the system, the monetary system, how the trade system, how the financial system were working, and to see that developing countries could have a voice. The idea was, it should not be dealt just among the key countries, the big countries, but you need to give a space to the developing countries. Well, the importance of this conference is that, in this case, is that we have a paragraph saying, please consider, study, work on innovative financing for development. There are many other issues that came from this conference, but now for this purpose of this presentation, that is the key one. That we have it in 2002. In 2004 and 2005, we have the head of Chile, Brazil, as I told you, France, UK, Norway, and other countries that they decided to implement it. The importance of how we're going to implement, this idea of that is coming from the Monterrey Consensus in terms of having an innovative mechanism for financing development. And this group of countries create a technical group, and the technical group was to think about what possible mechanisms we can implement for innovative financing. We have many ideas. There was one was, of course, taxes to arm trade. That was a kind of difficult one, but we have also taxing, like the Tobin tax, in the sense that currency should be taxed perhaps, and etc. But one is the key one for me, and because it is taken by Chile. It was what was called a solidarity levy to international flights, and that was taken by Chile. There was in Chile in 2006. We have a law enacted that will provide that every Chilean who have taken an international flight will provide $2. That is a small amount if you think what is the cost of the ticket for the government of Chile, so that we can have South-South cooperation. And this, at the first 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, that money was used funding something that was called unit aid, that it was a mechanism to fight against malaria, HIV/AIDS, and those kind of diseases that were very prevalent in developing countries. And that was 5 years that we provided that money. We sent some people to Geneva. We get some, and I think was very important experience for Chile. Of course, we were not the main provider of resources. In Chile, we have a limit of $5 million per year, while France and the UK were, and even Brazil was providing much more than us. But for a country like Chile, and maybe like Philippines, the idea was that you can provide something, that you help something. Money that was really mainly the diseases that were affecting African countries, but we feel it that it was worthwhile to use it. And we are very proud of that work. And that work was done together with the World Health Organization. Every decision taken on this, we have it, and we needed to do it together with a UN partner. And the third idea that I wanted to take is just using this law that we have in Chile to provide money as from international levy to international flight. In the year 2011 was changed in the sense that it's going to be used now to work with the UNDP to provide South-South cooperation. And this project of South-South cooperations are also very interesting because it's mainly, we have every year, since 2011, and we are restarting a new cycle in 2020 with the UNDP. Mainly is used to fund projects that are presented by the civil society. So in some way, we are providing South-South cooperation, but also we are helping our civil society to get the resources to do, this kind of work in other parts of the country, the world. Mainly, we use it in Latin American countries, least developed countries in the Caribbean, Latin American, and Africa. But any NGO in Chile can present a project. We will discuss that, and if it is approved, we will give this money for their work. And there are small projects, perhaps no more than $250,000. But every year you have maybe 10 projects, and I think it's very interesting, not only because it is funded by an innovative source of financing, but also because we are supporting not what the government is doing, but what civil society or Chilean civil society is doing. So these are the three main things, and this is the experience of Chile. And I hope it could be an idea that could help in other countries to do these kind of things. Even if you are a country like Chile or like Philippines or Malaysia, that you are not a developed country, still you can do something to support or promote, a better world in terms of an inclusive globalization and an economy that will be really conducive to the development of the developing world. Finally, I will ask Marco, perhaps if you can present, I guess, 3 or 4 minutes of what it is this fund against hunger and poverty. So while it is an old movement, so it is from the first years, I think it will give you an idea what we are doing and from now. So thank you very much, and thank you again for the invitation to this panel.
leña. Pues si no, pagar para que me vayan a buscar un cuyo de leña. Y entonces con esa cocinita yo voy a ahorrar leña, ya no voy a comprar leña.
62 familias tienen huertos construidos y muchas de estas familias ya están consumiendo. Por lo tanto, esto nos dice a nosotros que no ha sido en vano el trabajo. Hay respuesta, se está creando un cambio y la gente ya se está alimentando dentro de la producción.
Ya no vamos a ir al mercado porque ya tenemos aquí en casa y esperamos que siempre lo vamos a tener porque vamos a seguir sembrando para que siempre el huerto esté como está ahorita.
Thank you, Ambassador Galvez. It was a really interesting presentation, especially considering about the financing for development and development. Now we will move on to the presentation of the UN officer, Mr. John Alipala. So I will give the floor to Mr. John Alipala. Please.
To His Excellency Ambassador Claudio Rojas and to the Embassy of Chile to the Philippines, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the United Nations Resident Coordinator in the Philippines, Mr. Gustavo Gonzalez, for inviting the UN to participate in today's dialogue. I'm here to discuss the UN's experience on the rescue of Ambassador Eduardo Galvez and Ms. Mary Joy Gonzalez. It is an honor to be with you and exchange views with you today. Can we have the presentation, please? Next slide, please. My presentation today will cover 4 sections. First, a quick look at inequality to put our discussion into context. Second, an overview of the UN's role in supporting the Philippines' public policies to address inequality issues that the country faces today. Third, a brief explanation of how the UN undertakes this role and the challenges that we confront as a result. And finally, I'd like to share with you a few key lessons that we have learned along the way. Next slide, please. The first slide summarizes where the world is in terms of inequality. Globally, inequality remains a challenge, it remains very high. And because of that, as a 2020 UN report stated, the UN's core agenda of leaving no one behind remains a distant goal. And the same is true for the Asia Pacific. And I wanted to highlight this simple statistic, which shows that the top 10% income group in the region takes almost half of total income, while the bottom 50% share only 12 to 15% of that income. Next slide, please. The context of the Philippines is interesting in that the government has had success in addressing poverty, as official poverty indicators were actually on a decreasing path prior to COVID-19. However, inequalities remain a significant challenge, whether on the economic front, where, for example, the richest 20% secured 45% of the country's income in 2015, consistent with the regional statistic we saw in the previous slide. Next slide, please. On other fronts, such as geographical inequalities, where 60% of wealth creation is concentrated in 3 regions in the north of the country, while the poverty rate remains highest in the south. And there are also persistent gender inequalities, where, for example, Filipino women remain much less able to participate in the labor force and assume a disproportionate share of unpaid care work compared to Filipino men. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we see as the UN's role to support public policies in the Philippines, I would like to summarize them in 3 words: influence, inform, and involve. First, we seek to influence the selection of the government's policy priorities. Of course, the UN operates in the country on the invitation of the member state, so we cannot intervene. We therefore influence by anchoring our advocacy agenda on something which the member state has already committed itself to, namely the Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Second, we seek to inform. And by this, I mean we share evidence and experience that we generate from the UN interventions that we implement in the country, as well as the international experience and expertise of the UN globally. In addition, we also implement innovative integrated approaches, which we hope we can inform the government on how things can be done differently to achieve better outcomes in addressing inequality. And the third role is involving a broad range of stakeholders in policy development and implementation. We often say that the UN leverages its convening power to bring together stakeholders and use this to get the marginalized sectors, those most affected by inequality, including indigenous peoples, disabled people's organizations, labor sector, women and children, etc., involved in these policy processes. Next slide, please. To undertake the 3 dimensions of this role, we try to do this both at the strategic and operational level. For example, at the strategic level, the Philippine government's 6-year development plan has already integrated all 17 Sustainable Development Goals and tracks how their development priorities contribute to the achievement of these goals. Another important aspect of the strategic engagement is applying an integrated approach to our policy priorities so that they address multiple dimensions of inequality. Then at the operational level, individual UN agencies then undertake these roles through the implementation of agency activities and UN joint programs, which means 2 or more UN agencies working together to implement activities to achieve shared outcomes. Next slide, please. To translate these concepts into concrete terms, I'd like to present 2 quick examples. First, the UN engages the government on long-term priorities that address inequality, such as institutionalized and enacted. This social protection program adopts an integrated approach where we have economic intervention, in this case, transfers, designed to respond to social inequality by improving education and health, and even addressing gender issues. For example, by helping women without income gain power to decide how these cash transfers will be used. So building on this, there's a current UN intervention in the poorest region in the Philippines to test innovative approaches through a joint program. And help improve it. Next slide, please. So apart from working on long-term issues, the UN tries to be opportunistic, meaning we try to seize specific, unexpected, unplanned opportunities where so for example, as by Ambassador Rojas, the UN resident coordinator could not make it to engage in an ongoing policy discussion on targeted return of children to schools. And this will avoid the widening inequality gap between children's education, between those who can access distance learning and those who cannot. The Philippines is currently one of 5 countries globally with schools closed nationwide since March 2020. So the UN is advocating for a phased approach of in-person classes based on the evidence and international experience gathered by UNICEF and other UN agencies. Next slide, please. Of course, there are many challenges that the UN faces as we try to work with the government and other stakeholders on issues of inequality, which are likely similarly faced by other countries. So I'll just highlight two. First, the domestic environment can be very complex and difficult to navigate, with a variety of factors and interests that need to be balanced. For example, there may be more influential groups that can shape public policies. So going back to the point I mentioned earlier, one way of addressing this challenge is bringing in a broad range of stakeholders, so that it is not just the UN's voice that is speaking, but a wider coalition representing their common interests. And second, public policy solutions to issues of inequality are inherently long-term. So it can be very, very challenging to overcome views in short-term cycles. For example, in the Philippines, national officials serve for 6 years, while local officials are elected every 3 years. So one way of overcoming this short timeline is to link back policy priorities to the Sustainable Development Goals in the 2030 Agenda, so that issues of inequality can be addressed coherently over and beyond political electoral terms. Next slide, please. So finally, what lessons have we learned that we can share today and we hope that you will find helpful? Again, there are many, but let me just highlight two. First, inequality is such a persistent issue, so that addressing them requires innovative public policy, which requires changing mindsets. It requires significant time and effort, where showing technical evidence may not be sufficient, but also negotiation to balance the various interests and concerns. And second, integrated approaches are required for any policy response to effectively address inequality. As mentioned earlier, inequality presents itself in multiple dimensions, whether economic, social, environmental. So the public policy response also needs to be multidimensional. Next slide, please. And that ends my presentation today. Thank you again for this opportunity to briefly share the experience of the UN, Philippines, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Alikpala. We are having several questions in our Q&A answers. So we will wait for that section. And now we will move with our final presentation, which is from Mrs. Mary Joy Gonzalez from CARE Philippines. So I will give the floor to her, and then we will move to the Q&A section. Mrs. Gonzalez, please.
Thank you, Marco. To His Excellency Claudio Rojas and the staff at the Embassy of Chile in the Philippines, many thanks once again for inviting CARE Philippines to join me in this event. To His Excellency Ambassador Eduardo Galvez and our esteemed guests and co-panelists, Mr. John Alikpala, magandang umaga rin sa inyo. We are grateful to be invited today to share our work here in the Philippines as we continue to advocate for equality and social justice. We are also glad to be present on behalf of all our local CSO partners and communities that are monumental to our programs and initiatives across the country. A pleasant morning from the Philippines. Once again, I'm Mary Joy Gonzalez, and I am the project manager of moving urban poor communities in Mindanao towards resilience, and I'm from CARE Philippines. So I am going to share with you today our experience in influencing policy through practice and dialogue. Okay, so let me do a brief introduction of CARE. So CARE has been providing emergency relief and development assistance in the Philippines since 1949. Next slide, please. In 2020, CARE worked in 70 municipalities across the Philippines, reaching about more than 900,000 individuals through different humanitarian initiatives. So we provide food assistance, clean water, health, sanitation, and hygiene, support in livelihood and agriculture, and technical support in integrated risk management, as well as protection from gender-based violence. And more than 1.7 million people with life-saving information through online and offline education and communication campaigns. So this work is also credited to the 13 local partners nationwide that we constantly collaborate with through our humanitarian partnership platform. Next slide, please. So CARE in the Philippines supports the immediate needs of the country in terms of emergency or humanitarian response: gender, health and water and sanitation and hygiene, and resilient livelihood. This but also in different conflict and 19 pandemic. We also integrate disaster risk reduction, climate adaptation, and ecosystem management and restoration across all our programs as our main framework in response. Moreover, we promote our best practices and lessons learned through research, knowledge exchanges, and information dissemination. Next slide, please. So, developing countries like the Philippines have suffered the brunt of the strongest typhoons ever recorded in this decade, such as the Super Typhoon Haiyan as a record-breaking example. Climate change is expected to worsen the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events such as typhoons. There are currently 5.4 million people in the Philippines who are in need of humanitarian assistance. Both disasters and climate crisis jeopardize the benefits and progress already made in addressing poverty and gender inequalities, which in turn also increases the need to respond to even more urgent humanitarian needs. Next slide, please. So, despite efforts to address the humanitarian needs, a significant number of conflict-affected populations in Mindanao and other parts of the country remain underserved and continue to experience gaps in meeting their basic needs. The protracted and recurrent conflict and violence combined with natural hazards not only resulted in the loss of lives of the people, but also disrupted infrastructures and systems that support their quality of life and well-being. The needs assessment conducted by CARE and partners revealed that the population affected by conflict is in dire need of accessing life-saving assistance. The conditions related to food security, water supply, sanitation and hygiene, shelter, education, health and nutrition, and protection have also been intensified due to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So as the country struggles during the pandemic, women and the most vulnerable groups experience compounded burdens due to increased work hours for care work, limited income opportunities, and exposure risk from participation in community work as health workers. Movement restrictions increase fear and anxiety and limit opportunities for women and vulnerable communities. Displaced economic activities limit the access of the most vulnerable groups to food and other basic needs. Gender-based violence continues to occur in communities, and authorities even noting an alarming increase ever since lockdowns were enforced, while sexual and reproductive health needs are not adequately met. So social stigma associated with COVID-19 exists and is linked to fear and anxiety due to uncertainty and lack of resources and information. Yet, despite all of these, we have seen that women are actually at the front line of, or at the forefront of COVID-19 response. So this was based on a rapid gender analysis that we conducted with our partners. Next slide, please. So CARE also dedicates effort in bridging the gaps in governance and service delivery that ultimately affect the grassroots communities the most. So the Philippines ranks 9th among countries most affected globally by extreme weather events. So this means that different existing challenges are aggravated by unprecedented shocks and stresses like typhoons, volcanic eruptions, conflict, and displacement. Just last year, local authorities struggled with natural hazards simultaneously occurring amidst the pandemic. So we have typhoons, at the same time, we had volcanic eruptions, which actually highlighted the need for better contingency planning and funding. The governance in the country is facing issues that have undoubtedly hindered efficient policy making, the delivery of services, and overall resilience and disaster preparedness. So further held backward by insufficient funding, the capacities of local authorities have also been slow to develop. especially since the most vulnerable and at-risk population also belong to the poorest of the poor. So what do we do at CARE Philippines to ensure that we bridge these gaps? So we believe that capacity building and fostering local partnerships are key components of sustainable development and resilience building. Thus, we strive to create and open avenues for dialogue and learning exchanges among partners and communities. More so, to remind our duty bearers of their responsibility to provide inclusive and adequate services to its constituents. As climate change disasters and conflict often push people further into poverty, deepening the inequalities in access to resources and basic services, the role of the CSOs to advocate for the rights-based approach has never been more relevant. So empowering communities by strengthening local capacities through active participation is a key factor in pushing for meaningful reforms and bridging the inequality gap. So experiences, next slide, please. Next slide, please. So experiences and partnerships are built on and utilized to produce data, learnings, and reflection that help portray a more accurate picture of the reality on the ground. Having such knowledge then allows for informed findings and recommendations to inform policies that reduce inequality. So civil society organizations can help secure greater policy-making influence through bottom-up approach. So we bring the experience on the ground and document them and share with them through different platforms. So that's how we develop our key messages as well to inform certain policies. So CARE has also served as a conduit between local government and grassroots stakeholders to facilitate the dissemination of plans and feedback among the two parties. We are continuously striving to build more partnerships and connections to stimulate an active engagement and participation in various resilience and development initiatives across the country. So next slide, please. That's all from my presentation this morning. So if you want to know more about CARE, you can visit our website at carephilippines.org. So thank you very much. And back to you, Marco.
So thank you, Mrs. Gonzalez, for your presentation. I think it was really interesting. And now we will move to the Q&A section of our webinar. So we will check a few questions that we have in our chat. Let me check, please. So we have a question regarding human rights of women and their involvement in the economy from Ambassador Rosario Gonzalez de Manalo from the DFA. So this is really an interesting topic, and I would like to first give the floor to Mrs. Gonzalez, because I know that CARE Philippines works directly with this topic too, and helping local communities in one of the main topics is gender too. So I would like to start with you and see if other panelists also would like to add something. So please, Mrs. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Marco, and I'm happy to answer this question. So CARE actually engage with more women champions on the ground. And what is very important to do is to ensure that their experiences and we empower them through different capacity building activities so that they will also become more productive individuals in their communities. So as the saying goes, once you empower a woman, you empower an entire community. So we develop certain programs and activities that involve them through resilient livelihood and ensuring that we have shock responsive social protection mechanisms in place as well. And also most importantly, to create that space for them to share their voices, especially if they want to inform certain policies or talk to the local government so that their needs are also highlighted in plans and policies. So it's very important for us to create this space for them to advocate their needs as well. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. I don't know if any of the other panelists would like to add something to this question. Perhaps Mr. John Alikpala.
Yes, thanks, Marco. I think just a brief response in terms of what the UN is working on. Obviously, we do recognize the importance of human rights of women, and I guess translating this into what we do is first is one, for example, with the ILO, helping women get decent work in terms of their right to have decent work, for example. So working on women's economic empowerment through livelihood projects, also through agencies such as WF, the World Food Program. And then just, I guess, as another second example, human rights of women in the case of indigenous people, where land ownership is a very big issue in the Philippines. So helping women, secure, particularly indigenous women, helping them get rights to land so that they can participate in economic activity. So just two quick examples in terms of the areas where human rights does figure in the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that Ambassador Galvez has also something to add to this, because I know that Chile has also been working with this in some trade policies too, to make the economic women empowerment a reality. So I don't know, Ambassador, if you can add some perspective to this topic too.
Well, the only thing I can mention is that in ProChile, that is the Chilean Promotion Export Agency, has a special program called Mujer Exporta. I mean, women export. And this is because we feel that they need a special training, and they offer courses, and so it's not completely different what they are doing with other companies that are small, medium-sized exporters, but they have a special sort of a preoccupation with women. So they are trained to be exporters. And that is very important for a country like Chile that is very open to the world. And, most of the or important part of what we get is, in terms of resources, is coming from export. And this is related to women and a small and medium-sized enterprise. So to make sure that they're going to be part of our the last thing also I have, this is also in the economic department of our ministry. We just created last year a department called Comercio Inclusive Trade. It is again related to trade, but we want to be sure that this is international trade is not only for the big companies, also for the small and medium size, that what are the indigenous people that will take advantage of the possibilities we have as important countries, and try to answer the question of the gender balance, at least in our international trade activities. I'm sure there is many other things, but I'm just focusing on that part. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now we can move on to another question. Perhaps we can go back to that topic after some dialogue. And this question is from one of our ambassadors of Chile in the ASEAN region, Ambassador Diego Velasco from Malaysia. So we thank you for your question, Ambassador. So it says, Chile and ASEAN share the need to cope with nature's manifestations. El Niño and La Niña earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, forest fires, and emergency situations, or public health, volunteering, architecture, and design and cultural community solidarity, among others, are fields where our mutual experience can generate win-win cooperation projects. So this is a topic that I also think that is really interesting because, as you might know, Chile is also one of the countries that are more affected by climate change. And we have also experience in management of natural disasters. You know that Chile is also a country that is affected by earthquakes. So I think it would be good if we can have some highlights and some experience from the Philippines in this topic and see how it's working to cope with this. So perhaps Mr. Alikpala could begin with some insights.
Thank you. I guess I'll leave the more detailed experiences on the ground to Ms. Gonzalez since they deal with that. But I wanted to mention these are, we in the UN are grappling with issues of climate change, very much trying to integrate it in the programs and projects. Rather than respond, I think to the point that sharing experiences, I think the presentation of Ambassador Galvez on South-South cooperation, I think is the point I wanted to pick up, that there are a lot of lessons we are trying to learn, and we are trying to integrate South-South cooperation into the UN program. As I think our colleagues from the Chilean embassy know, we have been consulting with various embassies in terms of what areas can we assist the Philippines learn from other countries in terms of South-South cooperation, especially in these fields listed by the ambassador from Malaysia. So I think the resident coordinator here, Gustavo Gonzalez, is also the humanitarian coordinator. So I think one having a consolidated response with the government so that we are not overlapping. I think just in terms of emergencies, because we tend to be reactive. So I think being proactive and being ready to respond before those events occur is another point I would like to highlight. That I think the UN's role has been in this past few days. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, John. Thank you. So perhaps Ambassador Galvez could help us with this, because I know that Chile has also been working with some projects of capacity building in the Caribbean. So I know that these kind of projects also are not only related to funding, but also to the institutions that Chile has. And we have been working into being able to help with other countries by our own experience in this topic. So Ambassador, I don't know if you can add something to this point too.
Well, thank you, Marco. I don't have any particular and precise things to say to you, but anyway, it is clear to me that in terms of public policies, the question is what can we learn from each other? I mean, what we are doing that maybe it should not be replicated, but it can be a good idea that taken for other countries. And on that, I think that I'm more interested in what we take from Philippines. I mean, as a Chilean, and what we can learn from them, and how we can. This is for that was very good to listen to friends from the civil society, because we have been doing a lot of, I should say, we are cooperating with the Caribbean or the Latin American countries or African countries, just saying this is how we deal with this problem, and then we will see if it can be a lesson that can be useful for you. I don't have any particular one, because you need to know both countries. I mean, if it is going to be useful for Philippines, it's going to be useful for Malaysia. That is what is happening in Singapore. It's going to be useful for us, for instance. As you know, we have some different program, but I cannot in any specific. It will depend on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. So, Mrs. Gonzalez, I know that you are the most involved in working with local communities, and I know that the Philippines is usually tackled also by natural disasters. So perhaps you can give us the experience of care in working especially in resilience, that I think it's one of the main challenges here in the Philippines.
Yes, I agree with Ambassador Galvez because we have very different contexts, and and because of that, we also have different types of capacities and resources. However, how we do it on the ground is that we have in CARE, we have this framework called the Integrated Risk Management, wherein we combine strategies in disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and ecosystem management and restoration, because you cannot really separate the three anymore, especially if we are addressing complex emergencies due to various types of factors. So what we do is we take certain strategies from each of these disciplines, and try to integrate them with our work on the ground. So we do it through risk assessments and needs assessments with our communities that will inform the local plans of the local government units. So again, it's very bottom-up approach. And based on our experience with improving the plans and policies in the local with the local government units, we take this experience through national level platforms such as the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. And we institutionalize this through the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan. So we are very present in all levels of governance. So that's how we ensure that our plans and policies at the local and national levels are informed with experiences on the ground. So I think if this is something that can also benefit Chile, we're more than happy to share with you integrated risk management and how we do it in the Philippines. And also, we actually implement this in other countries as well, so in Africa and South America. So it's a very unique strategy with that's being used in care for building resilience. So we're more than happy to share you this strategy.
Thank you, Mrs. Gonzalez. So now I will move to another question. This question comes from another ambassador of Chile in the ASEAN region. It's Ambassador Ignacio Concha. So we thank the ambassador for its question. And it says, global warming poses a great challenge to humanity. The transition to green energies is the solution to tackle the problem. How the panelists see this matter on the context of cooperation programs? So perhaps we can start with Mr. John Alipala, because I know that the UN is also promoting the use of renewable energies through another specialized agencies. So perhaps you can give us your insight of this.
Thank you, Marco. I would like to, I guess, pursue my response and related to something that Ambassador Galvez mentioned earlier. So I think with regard to green energy, obviously a very big area of priority. We are hoping, expansion of renewable energy in the Philippines. So I think one of the challenges we face with green energy is the lack of financing to pick up the projects. But on the other hand, the other challenge that is also facing in the Philippines, we are facing in the Philippines, is the lack of bankable or the lack of ready projects, green energy projects that can be funded. So there's an issue of project readiness and also an issue of funding for green energy. So I think those are the two challenges that we see. So I think in terms of the cooperation programs of various countries, this is one area that could potentially be pursued in terms of working, for example, with the Philippine government or Philippine companies in order to develop these green projects and make them ready. And then the other side of it is helping mobilize financing, international financing that will support these projects. And again, to the ambassador's point, is using the cooperation program to link these two very important elements on the green energy front. I think I'll leave it at that for now, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Ambassador Galvez, you were directly involved in this question. Perhaps you can give us some insights too.
No. What I don't want to be here just telling only about what we are doing in Chile, because we just want to learn from others. But I think what we have improved quite a lot is energy, wind and solar energy. And that is, it came in a way that we never expected to be, working. It's not only in Chile, but in many places that we're getting. So it is, everyone thought it's going to be difficult, it's going to be too expensive, but now it looked like it's working well. And that is what, well, you need a country where, a windy country, if you like, and a country open to the sun. But I guess both things, investment are are getting very good results in Chile. And with that, maybe we can go to hydrogenous, green hydrogenous, because many people said that that is going to be the energy of the future. Of course, these things are well said now. We will see in the future if if private sector will be able to provide investment for that. And I guess what I see in my country is that there is some incentive, at least for these first years. I mean, you have we're providing the Ministry of Energy some money for that, for those who are starting this work, but we will see. The only thing I can say that I'm a little bit more optimistic on green energy than perhaps in the past. I mean, things are going well in some areas, if it is in Chile, it is also going to be in Philippines or Malaysia or other countries. And I hope that we will share among each other our experience and our practices. And it doesn't mean that you cannot work also with developed countries, but sometimes among developing countries, we know much better what are the realities, of a country who is not completely developed, that needs a different type of, I would say, not only for Latin American countries among ourselves, but also on, I suppose, Asian countries among themselves, but also in this two group of in countries that we will support each other, and at least in the green energy sector. The only I can say in more general terms is that I feel that things are going a little bit better than what we expected in the past, in the future. But this is the great problem, climate change.
Thank you, Ambassador. To summarize, I think that Mrs. Gonzalez could also give some ideas on this, because one of the population that is affected directly by these kind of topics, which is not using green energies, are the most vulnerable communities, because they usually live towards, for example, some places where the energy is produced, but it's heavily contaminated. So I think this is a matter of concern, especially for CARE, because you have been working in this topic specifically, which is the building of more resilient cities and communities. So perhaps you can give us some ideas of the effects or the consequences of not using these renewable energies.
Yes, I agree with what Marco said. What we actually do in CARE is really push for proper environmental impact assessment. It's actually not just with the way we implement our activities, but also integrated again in the plans and processes with the local government. So we have seen on the ground how challenging it is in terms of access to power and access to and how it is actually involved or integrated with their access to natural resources as well. So, so in some of our activities, when we do humanitarian response, we also provide solar lamps to our communities, because it's even basic as lighting is very important in a humanitarian emergency. So it's very important also that we take this experience and educate our beneficiaries or program participants in the importance also of taking care of their natural resources. And as we work with indigenous peoples also, it's very important to highlight their role as the stewards of their immediate environment. So we bring in also good practices in environmental management. So again, we practice proper environmental impact assessment at CARE, and ensure that we do no harm to our communities when we implement our projects and activities. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Marco.
Thank you. Now we are a little bit short on time, so we will finalize with two questions. One is regarding education, because I think this is a topic that my ambassador addressed directly, and I think this is one of the biggest issues when we talk about inequality. So let me. It says, how can ASEAN initiatives help in terms of increasing system infrastructure in view of the field of the Philippines being full online education and internet connection is the only, by far, has been extremely challenging, affecting quality of education. With the rates going, what can public policies makers do to counter the possible impact of generational catastrophe, as has been warned by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres? So this has been, I know that you are more aware than me, that this has been one of the biggest topics during this pandemic, which is the access to education for millions of children across the world. And this is a problem not only in Chile, but also in the Philippines. Ambassador said, well, the Philippines has been one of the countries that has been in lockdown longest in the world, I would say. So perhaps from the UN, we can start with that, John.
Thank you. I think I'll just pick up from the point that I made in the presentation earlier. So to the point of the question, that one is the lockdowns in the Philippines is really increasing the level of inequality for school children who are unable to access school and are studying from home. The quality of the materials that they have will be different from the public school to the private schools. So the return to in-person classes, as we are advocating here in the Philippines, I think is one very important step. So I'll just reiterate that point. But I think the second one, as mentioned in the question, in terms of the infrastructure, the importance of digital infrastructure, and that's, I think, as all of us know, that's become really evident here because of the pandemic, the need for improving the digital infrastructure. So that's, the physical connections, enabling Zoom meetings, etc., distance learning. But also related to that is helping people and children in particular be able to use and manage the digital infrastructure. So it first is creating the digital infrastructure and helping the government with that, but also working and helping educate the children and the educators to use the digital infrastructure so that digital divide and the education disparities can be addressed. So again, I think I'll leave it at that for now, Marco. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Mary Joy, perhaps you can add something from the care perspective.
Yes. So while digital infrastructure is very important, we also have seen how important it is to support community-based learners and teachers. Because even if we have these infrastructures in place, we are also looking at the competency of our teachers, and also especially now during the pandemic, how safe it is to go back to school. So in terms of safety and security, with regards to the pandemic, it's very important. This also should be taken into consideration. And also because one of our main challenges as well on the ground is our schools here in the Philippines are being used as evacuation centers in times of disasters and emergencies. So we should also take this into consideration when we are planning for the opening of the schools, especially now that we are gearing towards the typhoon season, and in the Philippines, the strongest typhoons come towards the end of the quarter. So we are also looking at really how we support our community-based learners, because they don't even have proper schools, they don't even have enough school supplies. So how do we reach these areas, especially in our rural communities, that they are provided first the basic education requirements before they can elevate towards a digital school system.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we will move to our final question, which is related to Chile ASEAN program. And it says that how does Chile ASEAN program is helping to promote the rights of women, in this region, particularly rural women. Please give us one or two examples. This is from Ambassador Rosario Manalo, and we thank for this answer. So we know that obviously economic empowerment of women, but also gender parity and equality is one of the main topics for our Latin American region, but also for the ASEAN region. So if we are not building anything or doing anything by now, perhaps we can think of what we can do in the future too. So I know that, or last year, sorry, 2 years ago, during our APEX year, one of the main topic was building economical empowerment of women. So perhaps our Ambassador Galvez could help us with this and see which kind of politics has been Chile doing in this topic and see what we can do and start from it.
Well, I don't have many specific ideas, but let me say that in Chile we are discussing a new constitution, and we have 50% women and 50% men in that group. So, and in some way we are, because if you want to improve the position of women, you need to give them power, empower them in some way. And there is no better one than if you are going to be in the place where they're going to be, where you are preparing the new laws, and the maximum law, the most important one, is the constitution. And you elected, the people who are working on that, and you say that 50% are going to be women. It is because they know how to defend themselves. I mean, you give them the position, and they will be telling you what needs to be changed in our laws and constitution in order to support them. But this is, I know it's a very general answer, but we're very proud of that. That I think it's the first country is doing this in that way. And that shows you how seriously we are with regard to gender empowerment, to women empowerment. Of course, there is many things still that need to be done. I mean, don't think because you have these big things that we have a gender balanced country. But let me go now from the big things of preparing and writing the new constitution to a small thing. We have a diplomatic academy in Chile, and we have 10 students, 5 are women and 5 are men. So if you go to very small, very concrete things, to big things that you are doing, and if you are preparing also giving special training for them as supporters, and so you need to go one by one in many issues, but still, if we are doing many things, it's because we feel things are not good now. I mean, there is many things that need to be changed. I don't say that in Philippines or Malaysia or other, you need to go, Congress might be 50-50 or the constitutional sort of camera, but to start with something, then we will see. And if you provide power to them also in corporations and companies, and if you make sure that judges are and the countries are, you look what is the gender balance, then you start preparing something, I will say, for the future. It's not that we are there, but I guess this is the kind of thing that we can sort of provide as a public policy that can be seen by others, and maybe take some of them if the conditions are more or less. So I think that is my answer. It's all for give them, power them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Gonzalez, I know that you have also worked with rural areas with the Care Philippines. So perhaps you can give us some good experiences and practices that can be in the future used as public policies through the Chile and ASEAN region. So can you help us with some ideas, specifically with rural women?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we actually work with women community farmers as a livelihood intervention post Haiyan, and also right now we work with women community savings groups in the community. So our approaches differ depending on the context. So one is urban and one is rural. So with our working with women in the rural setting, we actually do capacity building in terms of enhancing their livelihood and capacities in terms of agriculture, and also in ensuring that they know not only how to plant, how to grow their crops, but how to market them. So we capacitate a certain women individuals that would go around the communities to actually also support other women if they need help with and certain plants and certain how to grow certain crops. So we have what we call as women roving agents that we capacitate. We conduct trainings with them in terms of the type of livelihood that they have in the countryside. So whether it's livestock or whether it's farming. Once we capacitate them, we actually ask them if they can go to other areas to support other women farmers as well. So we call them as roving agents. So that's one of our most successful projects so far, and that actually we have received private funding support for that, because it's good to be replicated in other areas. So if you are also interested in that, perhaps I can send you a briefer, Marco. If you want to have a look at that project, and and perhaps we can learn from each other in how to do more capacity building activities for women in the countryside.
Thank you. Thank you. John, I don't know if you have something really short to add, because we are a little bit short on time, but please.
No, nothing to add. I think both panelists have explained very well, conscious of the time, but thank you.
Okay. So thank you to all the panelists who has been helping us and giving them obviously I don't know what to say, because this has been really interesting, very helpful to understand better what are the public policies in the Philippines, specifically the good practices and experiences, specifically from the local communities and local governments. But also, I would like to highlight something that the ambassador said in its presentation, and it was like, through the ideas of innovative financing, we managed to change local communities through the Chile Fund for Poverty. So it's really important for diplomacy, in my personal opinion, to being able to show to our societies that the work that is done there in the multilateral system can also affect local communities and local governments. And I think that's something that is worth mentioning. Being that said, I would like to conclude this with the closing remarks from our ambassador, Claudio Rojas, who will be giving us its insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you very much for your work done, and to be a very efficient facilitator, and really that acknowledge, along with the participants today, your hard work on putting together this seminar. So thank you, Marco. I cannot agree more about the responsibility that we diplomats have in order to promote new alternatives and new generate innovative approach to difficult and challenging tasks that we are confronted with. And I am pleased to be in a position that I could be summarized today's exercise, but also to try to have a sort of a kind of a forecast approach in terms of what we can do in the future in the context of our relationship with the Philippines, and also in the wider scope with ASEAN. And of course, when we lay out at the beginning the aim of this exercise of today was to talk about the international level responsibility, but it was agreed, and then we have a common platform to work on, that are the SDGs. Then we bring that down to the national level responsibilities and the implementation phase, and in that process, lesson learned and best practices, and also the involvement of stakeholders, the civil society. what is important that this line of seminars that we are having here in the ASEAN countries is in the context that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile is celebrating 150 years of its creation. So that shows a sort of a new momentum in terms of our foreign policy that is very fine-tuned with the need to promote economic and social development in our countries. And in that context, probably there's space for cooperation and innovation in carry on different targets and different initiatives. So first of all, my first conclusion in the sense of a summary is to highlight that it doesn't matter either that what sort of a level every country is, there's always a space for every country to try to be innovative and to promote ideas that will create, in partnership with others, a new momentum. And just let me give you one very simple example. In the case of Chile and Unit 8, we were a very small player there, but what it was beautiful about it is that in 2005 we didn't have any formulation for HIV/AIDS patient for children, and that's because UN agency in the field were giving treatment to the children, cutting the drugs for adults and giving to children, and that was very inefficient. But through the Unit 8 and through partnership with other international organizations and civil societies and different foundations, we were able to change. We moved forward to create an upstream approach and to develop a market. So we went to the producers of and we secured a market. At the time that we secured the market, and the chemical company, they were willing to produce, and that was financed by Unit 8. That was a major impact. Why it was so? Because children's, in 2006, we have a cover of 100,000 children. Next year, we double, and then later on, we triple. And it was very efficient in terms that the Cyprus, we developed, in a sense, with something that was appealing for the kids. So therefore, we didn't waste our resources, and we focused on that. And then we create something very interesting because we have a surplus in terms of finance and the efficiency of creating upstream market. Then we focus on our efforts in trying to prevent transmission between mother to child, HIV transmission to mother to child. And that also was extremely well done. And what is important that it was carried on by the agencies in the field, by the expert. So with that, a very small country like Chile were able to engage in something that it was very significant to treatment global bads, So in that sense, I would like to invite two different elements as a conclusion. One, that we have to be innovative in all the sense. And secondly, is that if we see inequality, the subject that conveyed today our discussion, is through all the 17 goals of SDGs, is present in the 17 goals. And I was making reference to the silo approach that the international community used to have, and nowadays we are moving into more transparent way, more crossover. So in that sense, I think that there is space and optimism to move ahead. We are in a very difficult situation, of course, with COVID and pandemic. But let me move on in terms of what we can do and taking on board Ambassador Rosario Manalo also related with women and the sense of responsibility for gender equality and all that. As you know, we do have a plan of work in the ASEAN context, and also I would like to propose like a sort of a brainstorming for my colleagues in Philippines and also for other Asian countries, ASEAN countries really, 4 or 5 ideas that I may have that maybe we can move on after this exercise. One is related with maybe we should look into the gender equality and to create a policy dialogue between gender equality. I think that that's very significant in the sense that Chile and our region could provide a learning experience and probably to see from the policy, public policy, what are being good instrument in a lesson learned and maybe to have a sort of an approach of best practices or comparative analysis. Also, on the specific of Ambassador Manalo, I think of what it was also mentioned by Ambassador Galvez, is the possibility to do programs related with SDG in market economies and what we can do to perfect markets, to have good experience in terms of engaging people to react with the small and medium enterprises, and those medium enterprises could develop into a market economy with sustainability, in the sense that probably is one of the major challenges nowadays, that the small and medium enterprises have been very affected by the pandemic. So now probably the international community and all of us, we can work and to focus in the sense how we can help a market economy on focus on the medium enterprises, and that could be an area for work. Another one is related with climate change. There is no any doubt that this is the only world that we have, and climate change is here, and it's a phenomenon that have changed dramatically the livelihood and the economics of all the countries in the world. So therefore, I think that we have to have a change and a very focused, substantive discussion for cooperation in climate change. Again, here was said also about new energies. Energy is a very important element of that. And I think that is probably to move a bit further in terms that it's not just energy, but it's more science and technology, because then in economic scales and the reality of each of the country, probably we can now apply concepts that are very sophisticated nowadays that they are discussing in the energy, for instance, but more into very focused approach in reality in terms of science and technology. And in that context, science and technology, and here in the Philippines, is a very strong reality, is the penetration of internet and the instrument of social media. And in that context, also there is a very substantive and very differentiated condition here in the Philippines, the fact that the level of English is very widespread spoken, and therefore also that could be also a very positive element of instrument of cooperation to other countries where we need to improve our level of English. And Philippines has done so, for instance, in Laos and Cambodia. They have worked with training in English, and also they have worked on training SMEs to understand the concept of SMEs in small economy. Also, all of us, I mean, particularly Eduardo and myself, we are in the way of fade out in our foreign service career, but probably we have to focus on youth. I mean, the only way to really to have a far-reach approach and to really realize that these issues have to be sustained through years, have to be worked with youth, and to create a critical mass with youth. So that's another area that I propose to work. And then probably I'm going to go into choppy waters here, but I think that we have to work in a framework of a strength governance and institutions. I think that that's a very significant element in our countries, all around the world, and in particular in our region and in Latin America and in ASEAN. What is important to work on the statehood of the sense that institutions have to be strong, the sense of rule and law have to be there, and the exercise of a strong commitment, accountability, and the sense also what is been listed in very precisely. I'm maybe I'm in choppy water, but I'm not saying nothing that is different from SGD 17. That it composed everything and one together. Because if we don't work on youth, if we don't work on strong institutions, then we are exposed to not achieve the Sustainable Development Goal, and also we're exposed of retract and to have a very negative impact in the well-being of the people. So those ideas are the ones that I would like to invite, has a path or has a roadmap for action in the future. And in closing, I just want to show you what I was using today. Maybe you noticed that I was using a pin. I took out my pin and I'm going to get closer to it. You see, the pin reflects the Sustainable Development Goals, but the other side of the pin reflects happiness in the sense of well-being of people. I think that's what we have to work on it. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you, our panelists. Thank you, Marcos, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your closing remarks. And with this, we conclude the webinar. We thank the panelists and the participants who were here with us. And have a great day in the Philippines. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Climb to be free. Walk to feel alive. Rediscover happiness in the simple things. Smile. Make yourself at home. Discover the joy of the cold and of vertigo. Listen to the silence. Decipher the language of animals. Walk amidst thousand-year-old forests and the countless forms of life that live there. Travel through the city's underground. Appreciate the view from up high. Then enjoy its unique sights. Look at the horizon and wonder if there is more than meets the eye. Lose yourself in funiculars and labyrinth. Find yourself on a mysterious island. Be amazed by a different culture. Learn about ancient beliefs and traditions. Marvel in their colors and shapes. Wait for the calm of night. And yet, feel that you are never quite alone. Understand that home is wherever we want it to be.